Starting to record. Don't always remember, but today I did. Okay. Good evening. Welcome. I'm glad everyone is here. Thank you for joining me. Maybe some will join throughout the course of our Shiur. Let me begin by thanking the generous sponsors of tonight's Shiur. Thank you to Chaim and Marty Hirschberg, who are sponsoring the commemoration of the Yurtzeit of Chaim's mom, Dvorah Hirschberg, Zichronah Livracha. We hope her neshama has Aliyah. And Hashem blesses Marty and Chaim and their entire family with long life and good health.
Amen.
So there's two sides to studying all these parashot that are now unfolding for us. The exciting part is like the stories are so riveting, they're exciting, they're thoughtful, they're provocative. They have so much meat to them. That's the plus side. The downside, if one could even say that, is essentially what I'm doing is I'm already talking about Pesach. And for a lot of people, oh my God, how can you be talking about Pesach? Who wants to think about that? It's too soon. But as you know, this is essentially the Pesach story. So while we're reading it, you may want to think about that. You may want to keep a little notebook open and say, oh, you know what? This is an idea that I want to mention at the Seder. I'm saying that honestly because sometimes people come to the Seder, they said, I wish I had something to say. Well, these are the Parshas that we're going to be learning information that if you are looking for some Divrei Torah to share around your Seder table, around somebody else's Seder table that you're going to be spending Yom Tov with, then this is the time to do it. So don't be embarrassed. You can take out a piece of paper, little notebook, and write. And I think it's a wonderful idea. In fact, one of the things that we'll be studying tonight are midrashim on the story. And last year, I went to the bookstore and I bought a book, but not an explanation of the Haggadah, but simply a book that's only midrashim on the story of Mitzrayim. And it's fascinating because as much as we love reading the Psukim in the Chumash, as you know, and as I've said many times during the course of our Shiurim, the Torah chooses very, very carefully which details to share. Now, it doesn't mean that there aren't other details. There are other details, but for specific reasons, Hashem felt that the details in the Torah are the details that needed to be internalized, as it were. But what about all the other details? Where are they? Well, they are, as it were, stored in our Torah Sheba'al Peh, in the oral Torah, which is not, in fact, committed to writing in the Torah Shebechav, the written Torah. So it's in these midrashim, some of which we'll have a chance to read this evening, that we find this fascinating expansion of what the story is about, and some of the provocative and fascinating, sometimes troubling ideas that our Chachamim wanted us to consider. So that's also a place by which we can learn so much of the story. So midrashim, and then again, please feel free to write anything down. So let's begin. Today's Parshat Va'era, and do not necessarily have to have a Chumash open, although I saw that our friend Simcha is opening up, and please feel free to do so or just listen either way. So let's begin with the story. So this week's Parsha begins, as it were, with a sort of a response to something that happened at the end of last week's Parsha. So you know that when Moshe and Aaron first faced Paro for the first time and introduced themselves and said, free our people, Paro said, who is your God? I don't know your God. And he responded, in fact, by making the lives of Bnei Israel even more miserable than they had already been, by removing some of the materials that they were using for the bricks, and then forcing them to find the materials, collect the materials, and make their own bricks. So when Moshe came by, the people were complaining and said, Lama Hariyota, like they complained to Moshe that through Moshe's presence and his advocacy on behalf of the Jewish people's lives became more bitter. When at that point, that caused Moshe to turn to God in a powerful moment, sort of like maybe a chutzpahdik moment, if you could say that about Moshe. Vayomer Moshe el Hashem, Vayomar, and Moshe turned to Hashem and he says, this is the end of last week's parsha. Hashem, lama hareota la'am hazeh, lama zeh shalachtani. Why have you wrought evil? Why have you dealt with such inconsideration to the Jewish people? Why have you sent me? So Moshe himself was troubled, and that's where Parshat Va'era begins. It begins with Hashem's response to Moshe Rabbeinu. We're not going to begin at the very beginning of the Parsha, but I do want to pick up the story in Perek Vav. It is the opening Perek of Va'era, and here are the Pesukim I want to read for you. I'm reading Pasuk Yud, starting with Pasuk Yud. But Vaydaber Hashem Moshe lemor, and Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, Bo daber el Paro melech Mitzrayim, vishalach et bnei Yisrael me'artzo. Come, speak to Paro, king of Egypt, that he send the children of Israel from his land. Pasuk Yud 12. Vaydaber Moshe lifnei Hashem lemor, hein bnei Yisrael lo shamu elai, ve'ech yishma'eni Paro, va'ani aral sabatayim. And Moshe said before Hashem, behold, children of Israel have not listened to me, so how will Paro listen to me? And I have sealed lips. So let's just unpack for one moment what Moshe was saying to Hashem. So Moshe is saying to Hashem, okay, you want me to go, and you want me to tell Paro to release Bnei Yisrael. And Moshe says, why will he listen to me? Even the Jewish people haven't listened to me, so why will Paro listen to me? So that question, or that explanation, or that thought, is one that I think we should spend a couple more minutes thinking about. And the reason is, because just let's think for 1 second. Moshe is positing the notion that if Bnei Yisrael don't listen to me, then how can I expect Paro to listen to me? So there's some sort of relationship between the first part, if Bnei Yisrael won't, how will Paro? But surely you and I, having read the story from last week, can answer that question simply. Why didn't Bnei Yisrael listen to Moshe? Well, the Torah tells us why. Because they were just so overwhelmed with the intensity of the labor. They were just so tired and distraught and depressed from all the work they had to do. They had no time to harbor visions of liberation and freedom. Stop bothering us. This is not what we can think of. That's why Bnei Yisrael didn't listen. So that's not the reason Paro's not going to listen. So Moshe's attempt to create some sort of relationship doesn't really fully make sense. Whatever the factors were that affected Bnei Yisrael's ability to listen and to contemplate and reflect and to sort of consider what might happen to them, certainly did not affect Paro. And therefore, the cold response that Moshe and Aaron got from Paro did not necessarily, the cold response that Moshe and Aaron got from Bnei Yisrael did not necessarily bode sort of ominously for the future from Paro. So I want to share with you an opinion of the Dats Kenyan Mibalei Tosafot, one of the Tosafot. Again, this is one of the grandchildren of Rashi. And they quote one of the Baalei Tosafot, Rabbeinu Tam, as answering that Moshe misunderstood the true cause of Bnei Yisrael's rejection. See, Moshe assumed that Bnei Yisrael rejected Moshe and Aharon because of their suffering, and they were just so overwhelmed. But Rabbeinu Tam says that Moshe didn't realize that Bnei Yisrael rejected him because of that. Moshe thought that they did not listen to him because they did not want to listen to him, like a person sometimes refuses to listen to another person's opinion. Not because I'm overwrought and not because I'm too busy, but I don't want to listen to you. I don't respect you. I don't like whatever, but it's not because of the work, the suffering, the kotzer ruach, is the words that the Torah used. So according to Rabbeinu Tam, Moshe attributed Bnei Yisrael's response to a calculated decision on their part not to pay attention to him, not to the overburdening work that was imposed upon him, weighing them down. So Moshe didn't know that. Moshe thought they just didn't want to listen to him. They didn't want it. He didn't realize the reason. Now, although the Torah tells us that's the Torah talking to you and me, the reader. It's not the Torah explaining this situation to Moshe, who on his own had to somehow navigate this path and came to the following conclusion. Now, it also might be that this would help explain something else. There's a collection of midrashim called, well, there's many collections of midrashim. One specific collection is called Midrash Hagadol, which comments on this verse. And I'm going to read a translation. This teaches that Moshe was angry with them and said, if Israel, whom I informed about their redemption, did not listen to me, how will Paro listen to me and release them from his possession? That's the Midrash. This is what Moshe is thinking. Now, Moshe's line of reasoning was born out of what? According to the Midrash, was born out of anger, because Moshe says this teaches that Moshe was angry. So according to this, Moshe's line of reasoning was born out of anger, and he felt frustrated by the people's refusal to accept the encouraging news of the redemption. Can you imagine that? Somebody's coming to say, you're going to be released, you're going to be free, you're going to be free, and they refuse. So, I think we refer this, it's not such a far-fetched notion for somebody who has been enslaved in a torturous environment not to be able to harbor images of freedom. It's possible. And we've seen that in the Holocaust and in other situations where a class of people has been systematically enslaved, both physically, psychologically, spiritually, to sort of not respond positively. So it's possible that Bnei Israel responded that way. So he felt frustrated. His response to Hashem demonstrates that he reacted with anger without realizing that the people were incapable of accepting prophecy because of their suffering. Interesting. So according to this Midrash, Moshe misread it. Now, could that have been the result of him having been absent for so long from the experience of slavery? Remember, after having killed the Egyptian and having been discovered and realizing his life was in danger, he flees to Midian, and he spends 40 years there. Hashem comes and reveals himself, tells him about the future, but Moshe is not part of that I can't even know what the word is, that soul-breaking experience of 40 years watching babies being thrown in the Nile. So Rabbeinu Tam's comment, let's go back, Rabbeinu Tam's comment should remind us, I think, possibly, of the need to, reserve judgment when we meet with people who don't seem to be so courteous to us. Moshe thought he was doing something great. I'm going to come, I'm going to help you, I'm going to save you, I'm going to redeem you, we're getting, pack your bags. And they're blowing them off. Moshe gets angry, he says, how can you blow me? Like, I don't get it. I'm promising you the future. I'm promising you the light. And you're responding that way? Maybe the whole story, of course, is for us to realize that you and I don't know what's going on in somebody else's mind or heart. And when we come home at night, we close the doors to our house. I don't know what's going on in your home, and you don't know what's going on in my home. And so when we go out into the public square, and sometimes we're coming with hope and with excitement, and we're met with somebody pushing back, sometimes even in a harsh way, in a discourteous way, an inappropriate manner, maybe this Midrash is telling us we should be a little bit more circumspect. Maybe we should be just a little slower to jump to conclusions as to, oh my God, what's wrong with that guy? And start using critical terms. Maybe instead of reacting with anger, with disdain, we should, at the beginning, consider whether this person's conduct was maybe the result of what the Torah said, shortness of spirit and a harsh labor, meaning that their lives are hard, their lives are difficult. Everybody has a pickle. Everybody has a pickle. And you don't know what's going on. I remember reading, I'm speaking now in my educator's hat on, I remember reading an article about a teacher who, a grade 1 teacher, who had a conversation with a mom, someone whom she had known in previous years because she knew her child was at school and preschool in the school that I'm not talking about the Jewish day school system. This is just an article, not even by someone who's Jewish. And she had known the family, and they were sweet and lovely and, pleasant, civil discourses and interactions. But as this child moved into her class, and she was the grade 1 teacher, the teacher noticed that there were some issues with the child's development. And she now began to contact the parent and to talk about these issues and her observations. And she writes about how at one point the mother at the other end of the phone just began to snap at her and shout at her and speak in such discourteous would be an understatement. And the teacher was trying to understand what was going on here. Why was this mom responding so emotionally and so strongly, and yes, even harshly to what the teacher was saying? Because the teacher is coming from a good place. Teacher wasn't coming to put the kid down or to give the parent a hard time. Teacher's trying to discuss and to strategize, but this mother just bit her head off, as it were. And then it hit the teacher. She came to a realization that she understood what was going on. And the teacher describes the mother's reaction as this, that the mother, in her reaction, was grieving the death of the image of her child. She was grieving the death of the image of her child. All of us have these expectations and images, and this woman, this mom, somehow in her mind, created this sort of life that her child, she wanted her son to have. But her son was not having that life. His life was developing in a different way. He was encountering difficulties. And somewhere in a deep level, this mom realized that her hopes and her dreams for her child, whatever they were, are not going to come to fruition. That was the death of the image of her child. And that encounter was an encounter of grief and mourning. And she sort of responded to the teacher that way out of grief. So the point being is that when people do that, it's sometimes hard for us because we feel we're getting the brunt of it. It's coming at us, and somehow we're arrows are being shot at us. But the Midrash may be saying the arrows are not really being shot at you. They're not being shot at me. They're coming to express something deep within the neshama, the soul, the experience of the person speaking, that's difficult, that's hard, that's painful, that's darker than they ever really wanted. And that the person speaking or having the interaction with us is experiencing some kind of hardship or finds himself under strain, and that's what affecting his or her behavior and speech. So just as Bnei Yisrael were just simply not in the frame of mind to accept Moshe's prophecy of a land flowing with milk and honey, so similarly, there may be people who we encounter who are facing such difficult, adverse situations in their life, and it makes them difficult to speak and act as they should. Okay, that's the first idea. Let's turn to staying the same parrot. So just a few psukim after what I just read to you, the Torah tells us, counts as it were, it gives us a little bit of a little brief history of the families and how they got to Egypt. I guess at the beginning of the notion of redemption that you and I know about, maybe Bnei Israel at that point weren't aware of it, but we know about it. So the Torah is giving us a little bit of a background of who everybody is and how they got there. So in the Torah's recounting, I'll read this, the beginning part. Eila Rashi Veit Avotam Bnei Reuven Bechor Yisrael Chanoch Paluch Chatzron Parmi Eila Mishpachot Reuven. These are the heads of their fathers' houses. This is now a description of the population of the Jewish people living in Egypt. The sons of Reuven, the firstborn of Yisrael, Chanoch Palu. So now begins a list. And we get to Pasuk 20. Okay, so Pasuk 20 is telling us about the family of Levi. So I'm gonna read this part. The Elishmot b'nei Levi l'toldotam. Here is the names of the sons of Levi according to their families, the generations. Gershon, Kahat, and Merari. So Levi had 3 kids: Gershon, Kahat, and Merari. Shnei Chai Levi Sheva u'Shloshim u'Me'at Shana. Levi lived for 137 years. B'nei Gershon. So remember, there's 3 kids: Gershon, Kahat, and Merari. So there are 3 kids, B'nai Gershon. So now the Torah tells us the sons of Gershon are Livni, Shimi, those 2. And B'nai Kahat, so there was Gershon. Now we have Kahat, Amram, V'Yitzar, V'Chevron, V'Uziel. So now Kahat had 4 kids, 4 siblings. Amram, Yitzar, Chevron, and Uziel. Shnei Chaye Kahat, Shalosh U'Shloshim V'Ad Shana. And he lived 133 years. And finally, the last of the 3 boys, Gershon, Kahat, and Merari. Merari had Machli and Mushi, 2 sons only. Elam Mishpachot HaLevi l'Toldotam. And that, this is the pasuk that we're going to spend a couple more minutes talking about. Leikach Amram et Yocheved Dodato lo Lisha. Amram married. Who did he marry? He married Yocheved, his aunt, as a wife. Ateli lo et Aharon that Moshe. She gave birth, Yocheved, to Aharon and Moshe. Ushnei Chaye Amram Sheva Ushloshim Ma'at Shana. And Amram lived for 137 years. Okay, so the part that we're going to be just taking a look at in this brief genealogical background is Amram was the son of Kahat. Kahat was one of 3 of Levi's sons, and as we know, by the way, from not this book, Sefer Bimidbar, in another section, just expands a little bit more on the family. And there in Sefer Bimidbar, Perek Kaf Vav 26, if you're looking, Pasuk 59, Nun Tep, the Torah tells us Yocheved was Kahat's sister. Gershon, Kahat, and Merari. And so while the Torah here just talks about the sons, Gershon, Kahat, and Merari, Yocheved was Kehat's sister and therefore was an aunt of Amram. So, the Talmud Yerushalmi in Masechet Yevamot comments that although Kehat and Yocheved were brother and sister, they had different mothers. Levi had 2 wives, one of whom gave birth to Yocheved, and the other gave birth to Kahat. So the question that you're thinking of, wait a second, aunts and nephews aren't allowed to get married, correct? But before Matan Torah, marriages between siblings of this type were permissible. And so Amram was allowed to marry his aunt Yocheved. Now, the Tosafot make an interesting comment associating Amram and Yocheved's marriage with the Torah's presentation of the Isur, the prohibition against marrying an aunt, which is not in this Chumash, it's in Sefer Vayikra. So we now have the greatest Navi's father was married to his aunt, which ultimately is not really an appropriate relationship. So in Sefer Vayikra, the Torah lists the various marriages with relatives that are forbidden. Listen to this, including the prohibition against marrying an aunt. And that's in Sefer Vayikra, Perek Chaf. If you're looking, it's Psukim 19 and 20. And each instance where the Torah lists a prohibition, it emphasizes that the violation of, meaning if one of these Isurim prohibitions is violated, the punishment is serious. It's called karet, the eternal being cut off, as it were, from the nation. This is an olam haba. Whatever that is, your neshama is cut off forever from being part of the, I don't even know how to describe it, the experience of all the neshamas of the Jewish people. But there's an exception. The exception is the prohibition against marrying an aunt. And in the Torah, in Sefer Vayikra, regarding the prohibition of marrying an aunt, The Torah makes no mention of karet. It's not there. It's not there. All the other prohibitions are mentioned explicitly as having karet, this notion of your soul being cut off, but not marrying an half. Tosfot claims that this omission was an intended one. Why? To protect Moshe's honor, because he was the product of such a union. And so although his parents' marriage was permissible at the time, it nevertheless might be perceived as a potential source of shame, maybe disgrace for Moshe Rabbeinu, who gave us the Torah. He was the one who taught us the halachot, and it's his father who ended up marrying a woman that the Torah identified was a forbidden relationship. So it might feel, that's not such a, in Yiddish it says pasnish. It's not so nice that the Navi of all Navi'im comes from that sort of yichus. So as perhaps not to embarrass Moshe, Tosafot suggests, maybe that's why it was not sort of the punishment for karet was dropped off there. So even though it was impermissible, the wedding was not forbidden at the time because it was before Matan Torah. But later, after Matan Torah became prohibited, so maybe not everybody would sort of make that distinction. Oh, it was mutter on these circumstances, usher in those, and he obviously got married under the permissible circumstances. So in order to protect Moshe's honor, Tosfos says the Torah made no mention of the punishment of karet in the context of this prohibition, sort of like to de-emphasize, not deny, but to de-emphasize. So let's just talk for a second about what message sort of is coming out of this whole piece here. Why is it significant that the Torah was interested in protecting Moshe's honor in this fashion? The Torah tells us about the genealogy, so it's there. So I often quote Rabbi Yehuda Leib Ginsburg in his commentary to the Chumash called Yalkut Yehuda. Again, Rabbi Ginsburg emigrated from Lithuania and settled in Denver, Colorado, of all places, and that's where he wrote his Sefer Yalkut Yehuda. And in it, he explains that the Midrash warns against mentioning, this is his idea, the Midrash warns against mentioning people's deficiencies over which they have no control. Like Moshe's deficiency, as we might come to think of it, is a deficiency that he didn't do. It's not as though he could have done anything differently. He was born into this situation, and so he has no control over it. And so if it is some sort of deficiency, perhaps the Midrash is warning us against mentioning it, because the person has no control under the right circumstances, and when spoken in the correct and appropriate manner, constructive criticism is acceptable and is worthwhile, maybe even the right thing to do. However, pointing out something in a person's record which he can't do anything about is by definition not constructive. You can't fix what you can't fix. You can't change something that is part of your heritage. You can't say, oh, I wish my parents were not, when that's who they are. Or I wish there's something about me that you can't change. There's some things are not changeable. The Midrash speaks of the need to conceal, as it were, the shame, that's a strong word, of Moshe's parents' marriage to each other, to teach us maybe to conceal and ignore the flaws of people that can't be corrected. Those flaws can't be corrected. Noting people's imperfections is appropriate, perhaps, only if it can lead to a positive, constructive outcome. Otherwise, it has no justification. And so by noting the concern to protect Moshe's honor in this regard, the Midrash reminds us that we also have to reserve criticism for situations where it's likely to be, to reserve criticisms only in situations which could be beneficial, and to avoid criticisms that serve no practical purpose. Now, what essentially I'm saying in different words is, yes, you can't speak Lashon Hara either. I mean, that's one other way of saying about this. Like, what's the point? Oh, you heard she married an ad. I know. We know how people talk. You know how people talk. And those are the things that happen, where? Over Kiddush, over coffee, while walking, while schmoozing, because we all like to hear those pieces of information, but you know that it's not going to end well. You know that there's nothing positive or beneficial that comes out of it. And perhaps reading between the lines, says Rabbi Ginsburg, that's what the Torah wants us to know. That's why the karet is not mentioned, and to protect Moshe's honor, because there's nothing he could do about it. Okay, want to do a little bit more. Staying still in Perek Vav, jumping ahead a little bit. So after the Torah continues with the family tree of Levi, it talks about Moshe, it talks about Aharon. Then we get the pasuk Chaf Vav. The pasuk I read to you about Amram and Yocheved was pasuk Chaf. So 6 pasukim later, the Torah talks about Aharon and Moshe. Who Aharon and Moshe? Asher Amar Hashem Lahem Hotziu et Bnei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim al Tzivotam. Translation, interpretation from the Stone Chumash. This was the Aaron and Moshe to whom Hashem said, take the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt according to their legions. Haim hamidabrim el paro melech Mitzrayim lahotzi et bnei Yisrael Mitzrayim hu Moshe the Aharon. They were the ones who spoke to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to take the children out of Egypt. This was the Moshe and Aharon. So I'm trying to be a little bit more clear in my reading and enunciation, and I hope you're picking up that there seems to be some sort of inconsistency in the pasuk, and the inconsistency is between the pronouns they and he. There seems to be a very clear emphasis in the pasuk that Moshe and Aharon were both commanded. They seem to be described together as having a joint mission, and yet there are times when the Torah tells us, I'll read it again, who Moshe v'Aharon, he. That's incorrect. It's they, Haim, Moshe, and Aharon. So obviously this is not a printing error, and Chas v'Shalom is certainly not a error in understanding of the Hebrew language. This was deliberate. So I want to share with you one possible explanation as to why the Torah, or what the Torah is trying to teach in this. Well, clearly, in the way in which the Torah is telling us, the Torah wants us to know that both Moshe and Aharon were equal in this task. Although it was Moshe who was charged with the primary task of leading the Jews out of Eretz Mitzrayim, but either brother was worthy of that mission. There were 2 brothers, and Hashem picked Moshe, but both of them were worthy. And so the Torah and these 2 psukim is stressing that there's an equivalency, there's an equality between the 2 of them. And it would be wrong on our part if we were to somehow think that, at least at this point, that one somehow was superior or had some advantage to the other. Their tasks were different, but not their equality. They are the ones who spoke to Paro, Melech Mitzrayim, take the children out of the land of Mitzrayim. This is Moshe and Aaron. So Rashi comments on the redundant mention of Moshe and Aharon in the second pasuk, after they were just mentioned as the subjects of the first pasuk. So it mentions them twice. And again, within the traditional rabbinic lens, things don't get repeated in the Torah. This is not some book. This is the book, and it was written, obviously, by the divine wisdom of Hashem. And so it's very carefully constructed. So if you have in Pasuk Chavav 26, this is Moshe and Aharon. That the same notion expressed again, Pasuk Chav seems to beg the question, why so? And it's not stum. It's not just because it's a literary effect. So Rashi explains that this apparent, in quotation marks, redundancy is teaching us that they, I'll read the translation, they remained steadfast in their mission and in their righteousness from the beginning to the end. They remained, as it were, like they were the same Moshe and Aharon throughout the entire experience of Exodus, of the Yetziat Mitzrayim, and throughout all of the 40 years in the desert. In other words, all of these things that went, all of the stories, all of the challenges didn't change them in some way. They remained the same. They remained loyal to the mandate. Now, why is that so significant? It may be so significant because that's not often the experience that many of us actually have in our own or in other personal undertakings that people take. There are many, many times that while our intentions are pure and altruistic, when we start a project, things happen, things change. We start saying, I'm doing this for the right reasons, I'm doing it for heaven, I'm doing it for because this is the right thing to do. But sometimes, and maybe you can even think about these examples in your life or that you read about or people that you know, after a while, when a person invests himself or herself into an institution, a cause, or a project, it sometimes becomes about him or her rather than the cause. We become so identified with the project, we take it on, that it's not a project anymore. It's who we are. And so when we invest ourselves, we're not just investing our koiches or our strengths. Sometimes we're investing our egos. And this is true in our professional lives. People enter professions, maybe it's medicine, maybe it's law, maybe it's social, or whatever it is. It doesn't really matter. And sometimes we have great reasons. We want to better the world. We want to make the world a better place. We want to help people. And we start and we take the steps forward in that direction. But in the course of building up our practice, in the course of our professional life, sometimes we can be overtaken by other or more personal considerations. And suddenly, we're not doing it for the sake of heaven anymore, for altruistic reasons. Sometimes we're doing it for me, we're doing it for my ego. Sometimes we're doing it because we feel pressure from a certain important person in our life. Sometimes we feel that person can be ourselves, our children, our spouses. So we may choose a different thing, but we feel that we're pressured into certain things. So it's not just about, oh, I started doing this because I just think it was a great cause. No, it's more. It becomes more. So it happens in shuls, it happens in schools, it happens in all sorts of other situations. Chazal, Rashi, quoting this rabbinic tradition, are teaching us that when Moshe Rabbeinu was first offered the opportunity, remember this, I'm sure you do, last week's Parshat. When Moshe Rabbeinu was first offered the opportunity of taking this job, as it were, bringing the Bnei Israel out of Mitzrayim, what was his reaction? His reaction was, not me. Who should the honor go to? Go to my brother. First of all, he's my older brother. And secondly, he's much more capable than I am. He's worthy of the task. He's maybe as worthy, maybe even more. And Moshe started his mission with the most noble of intentions. And Aaron also began with the most noble of intentions. He wasn't jealous. He wasn't jealous of his brother. So when Hashem appeared to Moshe at the burning bush, and when Moshe came and met Aaron and told him all the story, Aaron was not jealous. Oh, Hashem spoke to you. How come he spoke to you? We're brothers at the same pot. That was not Aaron's reaction. He said, great. He gave him a hug, gave him a kiss. Everything was fine. Both brothers entered their respective jobs with the most noble and high ambitions. And so the significance of Moshe and Aharon's accomplishment is that it was the same Moshe and Aharon throughout their mission. They maintained the same righteousness and the altruism. And they never let the mission become their jobs or their careers. They never let their egos become so involved that it overshadowed the actual mission. And the proof of this, I think, of Moshe's altruism is, do you remember what he did when he came down from Har Sinai with the Luchot? What did he do? He broke the Luchot. There he was, 40 days and 40 nights he spent learning with the most from the mouth of God. He superhuman fasted. Like, this is miracles of the highest order that we can't even begin to understand. And he comes down with the luchot. Look what God gave me. I'm unbelievable. And as soon as he saw the people going off the derech, what did he do? He smashed the luchot. It wasn't about him. It wasn't that the luchot somehow were a reflection of his personal accomplishment. He knew what his job was, and he didn't hesitate for a second to do it because he had no ulterior motive. It was all pure. And he never said, I can't break them. I put too much effort into him. He overcame what many of us have as perhaps a natural instinct. Because we have a harder time letting go of our ego. But he remained with his mission and with his righteousness throughout. And so did Aharon. And that perhaps is what the Torah is trying to tell us. We sometimes become so interdependent with the things that we do that sometimes it's no longer the cause. We become the cause, and we have to be careful about that. Okay, let's go on a little bit more. I'm going to now turn to Perek Zion. Perek Zion. Perek Zion begins with this pasuk. Now listen to this pasuk. There's a word here that we need to stop and think about because it seems to be a word which is used apparently in the wrong context. Here it is. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, and Hashem said to Moshe, Re'eh, see, nitaticha Elohim leparo. I have made you, and I'm going to say the word again in Hebrew, Elohim to Paro. Whoa. Ve'aharon achicha yihiyeh neviecha. And Aaron, your brother, shall be your spokesman. So I guess you can hear by the way I'm reading this pasuk that the word that I'm saying, we need to figure out why it's here. And this time I'm not going to pronounce it. I'm going to say the word Elohim. Elohim is one of the names of God. We use that to Breshit bara Elohim at the Shamayim and Arth. It's one of the names of God. And yet the Torah is using that word in describing not Hashem, not identifying himself, but identifying Moshe Rabbeinu, where Hashem says to Moshe, Re'eh nitaticha Elohim leparo. So I'm reading from the stone Chumash, and here the interpretation is Elohim is master. Master. And as I've said before, stone, art scroll, it's an art scroll publication, generally speaking, when it comes to its translation, always translates in accordance with the interpretations of Rashi. So when you take a look at Rashi, and all commentaries, of course, you have to wonder what could the word Elohim possibly be here when it's used to describe Moshe, not the divine presence. And so Rashi says the word Elohim means a shofet v'rodeh. It's a judge and a person who can execute punishment, and physical punishment even. So a shofet is a person in the position of judgment, not shofet. Elohim is the word to describe a person who is in the position of judgment as well as punishment. So let's just talk about that for a minute. That's unusual, isn't it? Like, you will wonder why. Why does Hashem choose to use his own name in this context? And again, every time you're reading Chumash through the traditional lens of rabbinic wisdom and understanding, these are questions that you ask. Like, there's got to be a reason behind that. So I want to share with you an interesting idea from another book that I like to quote a lot from. And in this case, it's Rabbi Dov Weinberger's Shem HaTov. Rabbi Dov Weinberger used to be the rabbi at the Young Israel, Brooklyn, the Williamsburg area for over 42 years. And in those years, he wrote his ideas in on Chumash, multiple volumes. And sometimes he comes with really fascinating insights, and I think he came up with one over here. So over here, he mentions a Gemara in Masechet Shabbat, in which the Gemara describes, as does the Navi, the inauguration of the Beit HaMikdash that was built under the leadership and the direction of Shlomo HaMelech. So you can just imagine the day that the Mikdash is now ready, and they want to bring the Aron Kodesh, the Aron HaEdut, into the Beit HaMikdash. So the Beit HaMikdash was constructed with doors. And so the Gemara says that Shlomo HaMelech reaches the doors, and the doors don't open. Now, these were doors that we're not talking about there was nobody to open them, but they needed God's participation to open as a sign of God's agreement that this house was built in accordance with everything he wanted. And we know that before David died, Hashem said to David, you're not allowed to build a Beit HaMikdash, but Shlomo will build a Beit HaMikdash, which he did faithfully, without scrimping. He did it with the cover. And so now the day came, and since Hashem told David that Shlomo was going to build it, and Shlomo knew that, and Shlomo built it, so there's a tremendous amount of anticipation, excitement, and they're standing at the door and nothing's happening. The door is not open. So why not? I mean, Hashem himself said that Shlomo should build it. Shlomo builds it. So Gemara says, Amar Shlomo Kav Dalad Rinanot Velo Na'na. So Shlomo knows 24. He's davening 24 prayers. Nothing happens. He says, Su'u Sha'arim Rashechem V'inasu B'tchei Ulam V'yavu Melech HaKavod. So he says the pasuk that we ourselves recite, and we bring the Sefer Torah back in our Kodesh. Nothing. Amru mihu zeh melech hakavod. People asked him, who is this melech hakavod? Because you also are a melech. Amar lahu. So he answered. Shlomo Melech answered this question. Hashem, Izuz v'gibor. The Amar Su'u Sha'arim Rashechem. Still, the door's not opening. So this, of course, is becoming a real challenge, and it's becoming more problematic. It opened, however, only at the time that Shlomo HaMelech realized what he hadn't said. Then he said it. Al tashiv pnei mishichecha hainu b'schut David. He said, therefore, do not turn away the face of your anointed one in the merit of David, my father. Mentions that, of course. He mentions David, then the door opens. So Rabbi Dov Weinberger says, wherein lies the connection? He says this, that Shlomo HaMelech was trying to teach us and them, but certainly us, and I'll read his words. The Kavanato Haita Lahodia Perush Melech HaKavod. Shlomo HaMelech wanted to explain, when I use the words Melech HaKavod, which literally means the king of honor. King of honor. The Kavanato Haita Lahodia Perush Melech HaKavod. De'eno mi shirotze kavod me'acherim. De'eno Melech. When you hear the words Melech HaKavod, what does it mean to you? Melech HaKavod, you might think, is the glorified king. The king who deserves or is the object of honor that is shown to him. Rabbi Weinberger says, no, Shlomo Melech says that's not what Melech HaKavod means. Ela lehefach, it means the opposite. V'hu talui ba'acherim. The kavod isn't the kavod that you give me, it's the kavod that I give to acherim. Aval perushal melech hakavod hu mi demi shemechalek kavod la'acherim. To me shemechalek kavod la'acherim. A person who, in fact, dispenses or gives kavod to others. So here's what Rabbi Dov Weinberger is saying. Why is it that when it came to this pasuk, does Hashem choose to describe Moshe as Elohim? Would it not perhaps seem a little bit chutzpahdik to describe the human being in the words that otherwise would be used to describe only God? And he concludes with this: Mi shehu mishager kavod la'acherim, somebody who directs kavod to others, shayach lomar alav dehu moshel ala kavod. That person is the person that one can say that he rules over kavod. Umishu mechapes umishtokek lakavod, and the person who searches for and awaits and desires to be given kavod, hu be'emet eved shel kavod. He is the slave of kavod. So again, what he's saying is, that's the idea behind calling Moshe and Elohim. Not that Moshe is a god and that you have to somehow respect him, but what is an Elohim? An Elohim is a shofet, which means what? I'm bringing judgment. I'm helping to clarify. I'm helping to direct. I'm helping to make peace. That's what the shofet's job is supposed to do. So when Hashem says to Moshe, Moshe, I'm going to call you an Elohim, it's not for the purpose of elevating Moshe. It's not as it were to call somebody Melech HaKavod, oh, you are the honored one. No, you are the one best suited to what? To give honor to others. You're the one who understands how to give honor to others. That's what Melech HaKavod means. And so too, Elohim, oh, you're calling me an Elohim. You obviously want me to think highly of myself and you want others to think highly of me. No. That's why Rashi says, no, Elohim means judge. To call a person an Elohim is in some ways to impose upon that person the responsibility to bring judgment and to find out where the truth lies. And that's not something that is intended to be a source of honor for you. It's a sense of your responsibility of what to do for other people. And that's why Hashem chose to call him Elohim. Okay. Oh my goodness, 8:52, and I have to figure out what I'm gonna leave out here. Okay, I'm gonna skip a few things that I thought. Let's stay within chapter Zion, and I want to skip a little to 19. So the Makot. Oh boy, I told you this is Pesach, right? These are the Pesach parshas. So in Pasuk Yotet, we are now talking about a series of Makot that Hashem is going to bring upon the Mitzrim. And the first Makkah is, as you know, Dam. Pasuk Yotet, 7:19. Vayomer Shem el Moshe, Kemor el Aharon, speak to Aharon, Kach matcha unetei yadcha al memei Mitzrayim, al naharotam, al yeorehem, ve'al admehem, ve'al kol mikvei memehem, v'yihu dam. V'haya dam v'chol eretz Mitzrayim, uva etzim, uva avanim. Say to Aharon, take your staff and stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over the rivers, over their canals, over their reservoirs, and over all their gatherings of water, and they shall become blood. There shall be blood throughout the land of Egypt, even in the wooden and stone vessels. Okay. Let's just unpack the first part. Vayomer Hashem Moshe, Hashem says to Moshe, tell Aharon, take your staff. Okay, and the question is, why Aharon? Why was Moshe not the person that was supposed to bring about the Makkah of blood in Egypt? Why did it have to go to Aharon? And I bet many of you are probably aware of the answer that Rashi teaches us, and this is the fact that you know this is just an indication of just how significant Rashi's presence is in our consciousness when we study Chumash. But I'm going to read it anyways. Why was Hashem insistent that the Makkah not be done by Moshe? And so Rashi says, "Lefi shehegin hayeor al Moshe kishenishloach letokol lefichach lo laka al yado." Because when Moshe was 3 months old, his mother put him in a basket. Where? In the Nile. And the Nile protected Moshe. So Rashi tells us, quoting a rabbinic tradition, a rabbinic explanation, therefore, Lola ka al yadu. Therefore, the Nile was not smitten by the hand of Moshe. V'lo b'tzfardaim, and also not the makat tzfardaim, which also came from the waters of the Nile. V'laka al yedei Aharon, but rather it was Aharon who initiated these two. So let's just think about this as intelligent reviewers of the Chumash. What's that message about? What's Rashi saying? And by the way, you probably also remember, while Rashi only here quotes Dam and Spartea, if we looked a little later on in the next Parshat, Parak Chet, 8:12, we will also find out that there was another Makkah that Moshe did not begin, and that is, yes, Kenim. And that's where did Kenim come from? Well, Aharon was supposed to do that from the earth of the ground. But Moshe was not allowed to bring about that Makkah. Why? Because the earth of the ground also helped Moshe when he smote the Egyptian and hid him and buried him and covered him with the ground. At least for a while, it gave Moshe some protection until finally it was discovered and the news got out and he had to run away. But for the time that was not discovered, the earth became, as it were, a helper to Moshe. So how can you turn around and then smite that which helped you? Now I'm trying to use the pronouns carefully here, but we're not talking about people. We're not talking about being ungrateful to someone who helped you. If someone helped Moshe, it was Miriam or Bitya, the princess, but the water is an inanimate object, as is the ground. Why are we anthropomorphizing, as it were, these natural phenomena to the point to suggest they have feelings? Oh, it's inappropriate to use them. Why? Is the water going to feel upset? Is the water going to be, indignant? Is the earth going to, talk back to Moshe? Like, what is this? This is our Chachamim creating this sort of notion in our minds. But you and I are not little babies. We understand that the idea of hakarat tov. We understand the notion of being grateful. But being grateful is a notion that applies in human relationships. It's not do you think it's something that applies to inanimate objects? Are you grateful? You could say, oh, that rock helped me out, but am I feeling grateful to the rock? According to this Rashi, Moshe had to have demonstrated some aspect of gratitude, and the way he demonstrated was by refraining from doing anything that might be seen as negative or punitive. But it's a rock, or it's the ground, it's the water. That water is there day in, day out for centuries since Hashem created the world. What's that about? So you probably have already intuited, I hope, that you need to understand the message being taught here. The message of gratitude is not just the message of expressing or saying thank you to somebody who helped you. Because if that was the message, then this Rashi doesn't make sense, because there is no someone here. And this Ma'amar Chazal, which Rashi quotes, is not about people, it's about objects. And objects don't have feeling. So what is being conveyed here? It's not just about my saying thank you to somebody who helped me. So what is it? And you probably have figured out, it's not that. It's that developing gratitude is not about making sure that the other person hears the grateful comment. It's about what it does to you. Being grateful is exactly the point. Being grateful. Not that I need to be grateful to somebody. It is appropriate to say thank you. But the goal of saying thank you is not so that the doer that did something good to you receives the thank you. The ultimate goal of saying thank you is to make you a better person. The ultimate goal of saying thank you is to fill you with gratitude. And I think genuine gratitude that's felt and that is experienced and ultimately really integrated into our personalities change us. And that is the point, not just of Hakarat Tov, which is the Hebrew term, but ultimately it's, of course, the goal of all mitzvot in general. But that's what I think this Rashi is saying. Not that we think, oh, isn't that sweet? Oh, you can't hurt the water, you can't use the earth for the makan. Somehow that seems juvenile, but it's not. It's the method by which the Chachamim are teaching us that the purpose of Hakarat Tov is its impact on me. And one other thing I'll conclude with this, when we talk about Hakarat Tov, there's another place in Chumash where Hakarat Tov plays a really important part. And, as I said, we're in the Pesach story. But outside of Sefer Shemot, there's another Pesach story. In fact, this Pesach story is so critical that it really does become the main part of our Haggadah, more than many other parts of Parshat Shemot and Ba'era and Bo and the Shalach and Yitro and Mishpat, and more than that. And it's the first 5 psukim or so of beginning of Parshat Kitavot. And there, the person, the Jewish farmer, he takes his first fruits to the Beit HaMikdash in Yerushalayim as a korban. So he's grateful. He's grateful because you're a farmer. You get up at 4 o'clock every day. You work, you try whatever you do. Of course, nothing is guaranteed. And thank God the fruits grew, and you have what to feed your family. You have what to earn a livelihood from. And so it is totally appropriate for you to express gratitude to Hashem. So according to the Torah, you take this basket of first fruits and you go to Yerushalayim, and you present it in a ceremony outlined in the beginning of Parshat Kitavot. But not only are you presenting the basket to the Kohen, there is actually a declared series of psukim that you need to recite. It's called Mikra Bikurim, and it begins with the words that we may recognize, hopefully you do, from the Haggadah. Arami, Oved, Avi, and in these psukim, essentially what we talk about is Jewish history, from the time of Abraham Avinu until the time of slavery in Egypt and the liberation of the Jews. And you could say to yourself, what does that have to do with the Jewish farmer who just has a truckload of oranges that he wants to give to the Kohen in the Beit HaMikdash? Like, he's just worked for months and now he's got his blessing from Hashem. So why can't he just bring the oranges and say, thank you, Hashem, for these unbelievable fruits, and thank you, it's all because of you. Why does he have to go back and retell in a series of short, but nonetheless, they're there, short stories about Jewish history? What's the point of that? So let me just share one idea that Rabbi Isser Zalman Meltzer, blessed memory, one of the Rabbanim living in early Palestine, great Talmud Chacham, he said a really interesting idea, and I think it's worth thinking about. He says, when you consider the obligation of Hakarat Tov, where do you start your expression of gratitude? Where do you start it? What do you mean, where do I start it? I start by saying thank you. Okay, so let's take the example of the guy with the oranges, the farmer. Where does he start his thank you? You might say, let him start by saying, thank you for this season of agricultural abundance. I got up every morning and I tilled the soil and I planted and I sowed and thank you. It's not wrong, but you're not starting early enough. The Torah's insistence that the farmer who brings his first fruits to Yerushalayim, to the Beit HaMikdash, start his thank you with the story of Jewish history indicates that the notion of Hakarat Tov is not about just you in the present. It's about recognizing all the steps that were necessary, or all the steps that happened and transpired that brought you to where you are today. You are not standing here just because of you. You're standing where you're standing because others came before you, and you are where you are because of a whole series of events. And you need to be grateful not just for the moment that you have right now, but for all the decisions that maybe other people made that led you to this moment in time. And that's the fullest form of Hakarat Tov. And that's what the Torah is teaching us when it asks the Jewish farmer to bring his fruit to Beit HaMikdash and to recite that little sort of synopsis of Jewish history. So when Moshe Rabbeinu was told to not hit the water and not be the one to cause the tzvardaim, and not be the one to, as it were, bring punishment over Egypt through the ground that ultimately helped them for a period of time. But what we're saying is that what it does is it helps us become grateful people, and grateful people understand the role that we play and others played in our lives. It's not just saying thank you, it's making yourself into a better person. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for tonight's Shiur. Thank you again to the Hirsch Books for the sponsorship, and please feel free to unmute yourselves. Let's see if we can open up. Oops. That's good. And I'm going to take myself off the spotlight. Oops. Like that. And there. Good. Hi, everybody. So I'm happy to say hi and hear some thoughts and observations with you as we finish up. Anybody? Hi, Jewel. I haven't seen you for a while. Nice to see you.
True. That's true. Thank you. So in terms of expressing gratitude and being grateful, I know if I'm outside and it's a hot day and then I see a tree and I run under and I'm in the shade. So I do feel grateful that that tree is there, that God created the tree and is giving me some comfort. Or even when I eat an egg, I said, oh, that chicken who laid this egg, although I don't know which came first, the chicken or the egg, but and that's why we say brachot, right? So anyway, we should really go around all day, every day, being grateful for everything. And
we should.
I found what you said to be very powerful and meaningful.
Thank you. Look, sometimes in the course of all of the things that occupy our time and our attention and our emotion, we sometimes don't always remember to be grateful. But it's probably a good idea that once a day we sort of take a breather, we sit down, maybe it's the end of the day, and we just sort of think about the things that unfolded and just have that moment of recollection and say, wow, some really amazing things happened to me today, and I just want to think about them and I want to connect with them deeply. You don't have to speak to anybody to be grateful. You just have to make that part of that consciousness. If you can connect with people in a way that they understand, like I really am trying hard. Like I go to shul and there are these security guards standing there and they're watching over us. And I don't know how much they're doing or not doing, but that's what they do. So I try to acknowledge them and say, thank you for your help today, every time I walk in and walk out, because they're helping. And sometimes we just take things for granted, Jewel. And I think that this message is important. I think actually, in my opinion, gratitude is one of the most transformational midot that we have, characteristics. And I think in some ways it's almost a cornerstone for so much growth. I really am a big proponent of trying to push forward in gratitude.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Thank you.
You're right.
Okay, everybody. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful week. Stay healthy. Do not fall on the ice. This morning was a little bit tricky for those who had to leave their house. But in Yetz Hashem, we'll see everybody next Tuesday night. And while it's still a little bit early to say Shabbat Shalom, but I won't have another opportunity. So I do want to say Shabbat Shalom, and I look forward to seeing all of you next week for Parashat Bo. Bye, everybody. Good night.
Rabbi Diamond.
Bye.
Thank you.
Rabbi Diamond.
Yes.
A quick question. I really would like to listen to this Shiur again. It was a really great Shiur. When do you post this on the shul's?
I don't post it. As you know, I Zoom it. So I think the shul puts it up, and the person to speak to in the shul office, Jonathan, is Meital.
Okay.
So I think on the shul's website there's a section for my stream, I think, and that's where you can find it.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good night, everyone. Be well.
Good night.
Bye.